let's get to it. So how are we doing this morning? Doing okay? Yeah, it did get a little cold this morning. I had to throw on a jacket on the way in, and that was refreshingly nice. But it's supposed to warm up quite a bit this afternoon, so all right, let's see. Make sure the stream is live, and it should be. It says we're live. It says we've been live for 45 seconds. Oh, here we go. And get myself into mod view so I can see everything that's going on. Where's mod view? Okay, this is not cooperating this morning. Um, all right, so what we're going to start to talk about today are, here we go. So I want that, and then the sword to get mod view. Perfect. What we want to start kind of talking about today is uh, sort of the fundamentals of how you build programs. And you do this with sort of basic units that if you put together in kind of a interesting way, then you can build sort of a very complicated set of instructions out of it. Okay, so let's just start with probably a good set of instructions, which is to take out some paper, maybe confer with your neighbor, and what I'd like you to do is write down the instruction to scramble a dozen eggs. So you and a frat buddy are hungry, it's Sunday morning, you want to make some eggs, okay? So the instructions, write down the instructions for scrambling 1 dozen eggs. Okay, and I will be not so silently judging you guys for your recipes. You are to write down the instructions for how to scramble 1 dozen eggs. Uh huh. Not 13 eggs, not 11 eggs, 1 dozen eggs. Are you looking up a recipe for how to scramble eggs?
No,
Wow.
I am looking the translation from Scramble.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, well, I definitely cannot help when it comes to the translation from anything from Spanish. No, not a trick question. Seriously, what are the instructions? How would you scramble 1 dozen eggs? Depends on how high the heat is, but and how many you're doing and how big the pan is, and
I've never
right.
done a dozen eggs at once.
Okay, fair. Well,
we could just say like scramble until soft and then stir. Or wait, let sit. Usually you let it sit to the bottom. I don't know. Yeah.
Are you gonna get some tasty eggs or some disgusting eggs, Mr. Terry? How are your eggs gonna come out?
Pretty good.
Uh-huh.
The master egg chef.
Hmm.
True. Is our skillet or whatever, is that implied on the stove?
Good question. Yes, any whatever tools, specify whatever tools you need, and they are yours, right?
So, it's probably about $9 in total.
There he is. We're discussing very important computer topics right now. Henry can catch you up, but I want you to write down the instructions to scramble a dozen eggs.
Yeah, we can.
Hey, they're your eggs, man. Hmm?
Season with salt. We have to grab the salt and pepper shakers. It's pretty flawless way to make eggs. We gotta open the fridge.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to burn the house down. Well, I mean, it could be like the Fi size on Sunday night.
We just have to make the eggs.
Huh?
Once we make them in the skillet, is it over?
I don't know. Is it? Yeah. All right. Well, let's come back together a bit. So, how many of you guys had five or fewer instructions? All right, what about, say, 10 or fewer? Okay. 15 or fewer? More than 20? Okay. So, as you can see, there's quite a bit of variability here in terms of how you would describe that. But what what basically are the kind of components of our set of instructions? So what was the first step for probably most of you? Huh? Okay, so you got to get the materials that you need and have them available and at your disposal. Okay, so what materials did you need? Obviously, you needed the dozen eggs. Okay, you need a pan, you need a stove. What else? Okay, salt and pepper, probably. Cheese, milk, huh? Butter. What else? Okay, you need some sort of plating for serving. You need the mixing bowl. You need a rubber spatula, right? And you need a whisk. Okay, how many of you forgot all these things? Yeah, not all. Well, okay, you don't have to have a whisk. If you know what you're doing, you can do it with a fork, right? That's sort of good enough. Okay. But all right, so you got all your stuff together, and then what's sort of the first important big step? You got to crack all the eggs. Okay? So, how do you crack the eggs? How did you guys write down that instruction? Crack the eggs? Okay. So, what's another way that we could have written that though? I mean, you just say crack eggs, and a human reading this is going to be like, all right, I've got a dozen eggs. I'm going to crack the dozen eggs, and that's that. Okay. But what's maybe another way to write that? Open egg? Yeah, Canton. Yeah, you guys are, that's not what I mean. Okay. But what about something more like 4 I equals 1, I less than or equal to 12, I plus plus, crack egg of I. Okay. So when you say crack a dozen eggs, what do you mean? Take an egg, crack it. Take the next egg, crack it. Take the egg after that, crack it, right? So for egg number 1 through 12, huh? Yes, I am assuming that there is a method for cracking eggs. I mean, bear with me here, right? Okay, but like I'm going to think about this as really doing the same procedure, namely crack egg 12 times, okay? And if you just write down crack 12 eggs, I mean, I guess that's sort of tacitly the assumption here. It's not like you're going to try and crack all 12 simultaneously. That would be a feat. How many of you guys can crack 2 at once? Eh. Yeah, well, okay, if you do it with 2 different hands, maybe you could do it. I don't bother because I just do them one at a time. Okay, so you're gonna, in some sort of way, describe the fact that with the cracking part, you need to do the same thing 12 times. Okay, not 13, not 0. Now I wrote this in sort of Java-looking syntax, um, and but I didn't have to write it in sort of code-looking language. I could say, um, take egg number 1, crack egg, repeat until all eggs cracked, right? Or something like that, right? So there's lots of ways that I could represent that idea. Is anybody like really good with art, like drawing? Huh? Mr. Connect Car, could you draw a picture of somebody cracking an egg? Huh? Given time? Okay. Well, I will make a really horrible attempt. There's a reason I'm a mathematician. Okay, so let's say we've got an egg and um, a hand. Um, right. Okay. Something like that. Okay. Now, my inspiration for that was like, um, uh, you don't have to involve words necessarily to do this, right? The drawing a picture and doing 12x, I'm thinking of like the instructions you might see in a Lego set, right? And this being a men's college, I'm sure you guys all had Legos when you were kids, right? Um, and I don't know, maybe some of you guys had the like princess Legos or whatever. That's okay too. No, the girl Legos. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, anyway, but like in a Lego set of instructions, right, if there were something that you had to repeat, like you need to make two of these things or whatever, then it would like give you the instructions to do one of them, and then it would say like 2x or whatever, and you'd be like, oh, I just need to build another one. Same instructions, just do it a second or however many times, right? And so I mean, pathetic picture there, that really is kind of pathetic, um, is, I feel like this is like that, the memes that have like the guy with just a circle for a face and like a mustache, right? This would be like what his hand would look like. Yeah, no. All right, anyway. So there's certain procedures that are repeated, okay? Um, how many of you guys had instructions or in anywhere in your instructions did you use the word if? Okay, close. What do you mean? Okay. Okay. So until something, right? That's kind of like saying repeat the procedure 12 times. Not exactly the same word, but um, the advantage of writing something like that is that then your instructions, if you just defined that there were 24 eggs at the beginning, then your set of instructions would be could be how to scramble 24 eggs, right? The number of eggs could be variable. Did anybody write a variable like num eggs equals 12 up at the top or anything like that? Okay, that's how we might do it on a computer, right? Give a variable a name and assign its value to be 12 or whatever. Okay, so nobody used the word if in your instructions anywhere, or then. Okay, and maybe they weren't necessary for this particular thing, but now that I've said those two words, what might be an instruction that's somehow involved with the eggs that might involve the words if and then, or if then else? Yeah. Okay. If eggs stuck to pan, add more butter. I don't know. I think probably adding more butter is always a good idea, but maybe. I actually usually don't use butter when I make my eggs, and often not even milk either. But because I don't keep milk on hand because I don't drink it except with my coffee, and that's Byron's making it, not me. So, all right. So what else, right? If it's sticking too much or whatever, you might need to add some more butter or oil or whatever you're using there. Um, maybe you guys tacitly used this when it came to once the eggs are done, salt and pepper. Like if desired, add salt and pepper, or a lot of times recipes will say something like salt and pepper to taste, right? So if you like pepper, add some pepper. If you don't like pepper, well, don't. Okay. What else? What other kinds of situations could you use if and then that involve eggs? Okay. Once it reaches, the appropriate temperature or, consistency or something, then you know that they're done and you can stop the procedure. Um, yeah, okay, so maybe the egg example is not particularly good there. But what what about like I don't know, let's say you crack the first egg and it smells funny. Just say. What might you do? Yeah. Ah, the water test. Clever. Okay. So Mr. Terry said if you crack one of the eggs and it smells funny, put the other 11 in a bowl of water. And what's the idea there? You put the egg in the water, and if it sinks to the bottom, then it's fresh. If it floats, throw that thing out. Okay. How many of you guys knew that trick, by the way? No? Okay, learn something new every day. Yeah, you take fresh eggs or eggs, and if you want to determine their freshness, just fill a bowl full of water so it's, like 3 egg heights deep or something. Put the egg in. If it sinks to the bottom, it's nice and fresh. Otherwise, it's sketch. Okay. Um, hmm? Good? Yeah. Now, this probably doesn't really apply so much in y'all's fraternities because you probably are going through eggs so quickly that, you're using them the day after they get into the house. So they're probably going to be plenty fresh. But like if the power went out or something, then, you know, you might question whether or not your eggs are good. Um, okay. So, um, I mean, some of those are maybe contrived examples, right? But what, I guess, sort of on a fundamental level, if I had asked you guys to write the instructions for some completely different task, like weed a flower bed, okay, has nothing whatsoever to do with preparing eggs, um, what would the instructions for weeding a flower bed look like? Like what might they look like? Okay, yeah. Okay, materials, right, and other necessary objects for doing the job. Gloves, maybe a little one of those little shovels, huh? Uh, garden stake. I'm sorry, what? Oh, spade. Yes, thank you. Blech. These masks really make uh, speaking difficult or understanding difficult. We should just all use like learn sign language, and then yeah, it would be kind of cool, right? So, so, did anybody study sign language in school? No. So I had an advisee. He just graduated last year, um, and in high school, that's actually what he took for foreign language was ASL instead of Spanish or whatever. He said he loved it. So anyway, um, okay, but right, so you're going to get whatever materials together for the job, right? So you need to have a spade, you need to have maybe the little like rake looking thing that's real small, the hand size one, a pair of gloves, maybe some like snipper things, various garden tools. I mean, this one I'm far less competent on how to do. I outsource the gardening operations to others because that is not my bailiwick. Um, okay, but what are you going to do? You're going to start at one end of the flower bed. You're going to look for, oh, that's a flower. Okay, leave it. If flower, leave in garden. If weed, remove weed. Okay. And we'll assume that there's some sort of easy way to identify what's a flower and what's a weed. Um, but you might have the word like if and then there, right? Like if the plant is the desired type, leave it. Otherwise, remove it. And if you like, how do you remove it? Well, you say maybe tug at it until the roots come out. And if that doesn't happen, maybe you just have to say, okay, well then if just tugging at it doesn't work, then dig it out until you get the roots and then pull it out and then put the dirt back or whatever. Okay. Okay. So fundamentally then, instructions are going to have the following kinds of components. And not every set of instructions would have everything in this list, but probably they're going to have at least some of the things in this list. Okay, so we have individual instructions. Okay, so examples of that might be crack egg or um, um, let's say remove weed or stir. Okay, so things like that, where it's a single instruction, do this thing. And the tacit assumption is that you know how to do that thing. It's been defined, right? So if I wanted to be really pedantic here with say the egg cracking, and I just said crack egg, you guys know what that means, okay? But what about if I like wanted to teach a robot to do this? I'm probably going to have to go into more detail somewhere else about what cracking an egg means and how to do that. And that might involve, okay, pick up egg, get edge of bowl or counter, strike with so much force, etc. Okay. Um, but okay, so you got individual instructions. Then there were conditional instructions. Okay, which can come in kind of two flavors. The if then, a lot of times in English, we don't actually say the word then, but it's sort of implied. So if you say something like, if you like pepper, add pepper, well, the word then was tacitly there. If you like pepper, then add pepper. Okay. Um, or say something like, uh, if the eggs are done, then turn off stove, serve eggs. Otherwise, continue cooking. Okay, so two different kinds of things there that you might have. Okay, so the individual instructions, the conditional instructions, and then um, what I'm going to call definition. And this would be like saying something like that the number of eggs is equal to 12, like you're declaring something. So maybe definitional is a bad word. Let me say declarative. Okay, so that the number of eggs equals 12, and maybe you're going to say, I'm going to call my stove capital stove. Okay, so this is sort of um, in object-oriented programming, you would do something like this, where somebody would have defined a class of objects called stoves, and you're saying, oh, I have a particular example of that object of that class. Here's my stove. Okay, yeah.
So like when you have to teach the robot to like strike with so much force or something like that, like how do you know, or I guess what's it called? What's that coding called that like the robot already knows how to do certain things? Like what kind of things? Like how do you know what it knows how to do and what it doesn't know how to do?
Well, okay. For the sake of the discussion, let's just assume it knows nothing. Okay. And that like I mean that's kind of a bad example. Like it knows how to you can say move arm to this position or move body over here or something. Like yeah, I mean maybe the robot was not the best of examples. Just because it would be kind of complicated to define all that stuff, right? Um, yeah. All right. So then what would be the last maybe kind of piece that we used here? Yeah. I'm sorry? Okay, so yeah, maybe some sort of thing to say that we've terminated, right? That the instructions are over. Okay. I'm not sure how I want to put that. Uh, I might actually add that to the individual instructions. Okay. A lot of languages, though, do have some sort of instruction that basically says stop doing things, like terminate the program. Um, then, what about the egg cracking part? What did we do with that? Well, we cracked 12 eggs, right? So how could we have described that? We could have described it as repeat the procedure cracking an egg 12 times, okay? So these are what we call iterative expressions. It would help if I could spell this morning. Okay. And there's going to be sort of three examples of this, or three sort of types, um, which we'll see. We'll go into detail, obviously, more about all of them. Um, while, do while, and for. Okay, so a good example of a while construction would be while eggs are not finished, keep heating, keep the stove on, occasionally stir the eggs, or, use your spatula to scrape kind of the bottom of the pan and in sort of a circular motion so that the more firm parts of the eggs that are at the bottom of the pan move to the top and the liquid runs under, and then eventually you have firm eggs kind of all over. Yeah. Okay. Um, four would be like we had 12 eggs, cracked 12 of them. And then do while is uh, not all languages have a way to represent that, but the basic idea is you start doing something and then you check whether or not you want to continue doing it. But the assumption is that you start the procedure no matter what. Okay. Um, okay. So really, a computer program is going to be some combination, or maybe forget computers, right? A set of instructions to scramble eggs or weed a garden or do any kind of thing is going to be some combination of these sorts of structures. Okay. Um, and there might be another one that we'll kind of add with individual instructions, which I'll call functions, but we'll talk about that later. And then there is also, I guess, with functions, or maybe you could call it iterated. How many of you guys have heard of the word recursion before? Yeah. To understand recursion, you must first understand recursion. Okay. So we'll talk all about that later. Um, and so maybe actually I should just put it in the list here. Recursive. Okay. And the recursive stuff is going to blow most of your minds. So that's going to be so much fun. Can't wait to do it. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, right, instructions, which is to say computer program, are just fancy combinations of all of that stuff. It might be 10,000 lines long or millions of lines long when it comes to like really serious programs like video games or operating systems or something like that. Or it might be, 5 or 10 instructions. Okay. Um, and uh, yeah, Coy on the chat here says recursion gets ugly. Yes, it does, and we'll get to see all the joyous bits of recursion later. Okay, so does that kind of big picture sort of make sense here? Yeah? Okay, now, how do we represent all of these kinds of instructions? Well, with your egg cracking or scrambling, you wrote most of this in English, right? Did we have to write it in English? Of course not. You could have written it in French or Spanish or whatever. Fine. Could you have done this sort of pictorially? Well, if you're not like not me, right? Could you maybe have done that a little bit better? If your art skills are non-suck, unlike mine. Okay, presumably. Um, Maybe that wouldn't be the best way of expressing this particular procedure, but another procedure that we could have done would have been, imagine that I gave you all a piece of paper and said, fold me a paper airplane and write down the instructions to do it. Wouldn't drawing pictures probably be a good idea in that case? Right? Fold it. I mean, maybe also throw in words, right? Fold it hot dog style and then, fold this corner down this way and so on. And did you guys, when you were in elementary school, folding things hamburger and hot dog style? Yeah, okay, they still do that. Okay, good. Just checking, because there's a lot of things that we used to do in elementary school that I don't think you guys do anyway anymore. Um, so yeah. Um, okay, so there are lots of different ways that you could represent each of these things pictorially, textually, in English as, say, a natural human language, in Java, in Python, in C++, right? There are lots of different computer programming languages. Um, and so what we want to kind of do is look at each of these things and then kind of examples of how this would look in, say, a real program, okay, or a real language of some sort. For a lot of stuff, I'll use basically Python looking code, because one of the nice things about Python is that it doesn't look as frightening as other code, right? So, like Java, there's semicolons and curly braces all over the place. And if you forget a curly brace, your program won't run at all. And it's like you're doomed. Okay. But if you have, something like, well, Python, you don't have to worry about a lot of those things. It's very, very clean. Um, so, right. All right. So let's maybe look at an example of of some of these sorts of things. So why don't we start with the individual instructions as just thing? Okay. So an individual instruction, or perhaps a declarative. Okay, I could say something like num eggs equals 1. Okay, or well, let's just say 12 because we were using a dozen eggs. All right, so what does this sort of do? Like if I'm going to type this in sort of a computer language, it's going to set a variable whose name is num eggs to have the value 12. Okay, this is how I might write that in Python. Would help if I could spell. If I were to do this in, say, Java or C++, I might have to write it like this. Okay, so what's that bit at the front? The int. Okay, well, Python, one of the downsides, it's both an upside and a downside to that language, is that you don't have to be quite so specific as to what kind of object your variables are, it's sort of smart enough to figure out what you mean, or probably mean. The downside is that you sweep a lot of details that usually are important kind of under the rug, in my opinion. In Java or C++ or something like that, you have to be a lot more specific about what kind of information are you specifying, okay? So the number of eggs being, what's sort of the assumption there? What kinds of numbers do eggs come in? Huh? Well, yes, okay, that's not what I meant by come in, but yeah, okay. So you go to the store, right? The smallest quantity of eggs that you can buy at once is maybe a half dozen, right? Sometimes they got those little baby crates, okay? But you're not going to be able to go to the store and buy 17 eggs. You could buy 18, you can buy 12, can't buy 17, okay? But let's just imagine for the moment that you could buy individual eggs at a store, okay? How would the eggs come? What kind of number describes that? Yeah. A positive whole number. It would make sense to talk about having 0 eggs, possibly. Okay. So not necessarily positive. Would it make sense to talk about having -2 eggs? Probably not. Okay. But point being, it definitely doesn't make sense to talk about 3.2 eggs. Right? That's just nonsense. Okay. So eggs come in whole numbers, which the fancy way of saying that is that they come as integers. Okay, yes? Yeah? Okay. So they're coming in integers, um, and uh, as opposed to other things might come in different amounts. So, for example, milk, okay, yeah, at the store you buy it in specific quantities, but again, let's just imagine that there's like a giant tank in the store, and you bring in your container of whatever size you want, and you fill it up, and they charge you like per ounce or liter or something. Okay. Would it make sense to talk about 12.7 liters of milk? Okay. Yeah, it does. Okay. So an integer is probably not the kind of object you want to use to represent a quantity of milk, but it is the kind of object you'd want to use to represent the number of eggs you've got. Okay. And depending on the language, so like Python, you could say, um, let's say, milk quantity equals 12.7. But in C++ or Java, you would have to say something like float milk quantity equals 12.7 semicolon. Okay, something like that. Okay, so you have to specify what kind of object is that data. Is it a float? Is it a, yeah, okay. Um, so those are the two, so floats and ints. Well, we talked about those when we talked about encoding numbers, right? What else is there? It's either a whole number or it isn't. And we have two different systems to handle that. Um, and in depending on the language you're working in and the context you're working in, like if I were to do this on my computer right now and program something with an int, what's the computer, like how many bits is that going to be? Any guesses? It's not going to be 8. It's probably going to be 32, maybe 64. Okay. Um, it depends on the particular environment and whatnot. Okay. Floats, same thing. It's probably going to be 32-bit, possibly 64-bit. Um, But so what's the difference between those systems and say the 8-bit stuff that we did? Fundamentally nothing. It's just more bits, right? That's it. Okay, so the only reason, excuse me, that we kind of limited ourselves to doing things with 8 bits was just to make it easy to write down on paper, right? Because if I told you to do, like, imagine the floating point assignment that you guys have been working on, right? Imagine if I gave you that with 64 bits. It'd be a lot of crap to write down, right? Huh? Well, okay, right. Yeah, you struggled with 8, but like, let's say you perfectly understood all of the 8-bit problems. Then me giving you equivalent 64-bit problems would be the same thing. It would just be more to write down. It would take longer, not because it's more difficult, but just because there's more stuff to keep up with. Okay. All right. So, what other data types could we have, though? Well, we could have letters or strings. Okay. Those probably are going to get stored in ASCII, though that depends on the language. Java stores stuff in Unicode rather than ASCII. Okay. But we'll just stick with ASCII because it's simple. Um, I could have like true false things, so what's called a Boolean. Okay, whether or not, you know, that can only be true or false or 0 or 1, something like that. Um, and then I could mix all of these sorts of things. So, um, maybe I say, all right, there's an object that's like refrigerator contents. And the refrigerator has a number of eggs within it, and an amount of milk within it, and an amount of cheese within it, and something like that. So you can define sort of compound objects. Um, okay, so so these were all declarative instructions. Say declaring that the number of eggs is something, or the number or the amount of milk is something else. I could also do things like uh, that. Okay, now if you were in a math class and somebody wrote eggs equals eggs minus 1, you would probably start laughing at them because, from a mathematical standpoint, what does that seem to imply? Yeah, that 0 equals negative 1, which is garbage. Okay, this is sort of one of the troubles, though, about computers versus programming. What does the equal symbol mean in programming? Yeah, I'm assigning the value that's on the right-hand side to the object that's on the left-hand side. So sometimes actually in text, you'll see this written with an arrow, okay, meaning, all right, so let's say that the number of eggs is 12. What's that minus 1? Okay, assign that 11 is now the new value of the variable eggs, okay? And then if I did something like this again, I'd say, okay, what's the value of eggs? And you guys would say 11 because we just subtracted 1, okay? Um, right, so equals in most programming languages means assignment, not equal like in math class, okay? And we'll talk about what equal like in math class means or looks like um, later. Um, okay, we should probably quit here. We'll pick up with this Friday and uh, talk about conditionals and iterative expressions and such. So, all right. Well, time flies when you're having fun, right? So, all right. I'll quit the stream and see you guys Friday.